over to my head. That's the extreme case of devotion of love. Maybe some criticism is there about because it explained about objectivity and embodiment, but we have to look at the philosophical aspect which is being there. Though there is characteristics of worldly lust and transcendental love, they are completely different. But Jaidev is the first person who brought that lust-related love into the philosophical dimension of love. Kavi Samrat wrote couple of poems which were more embodiment of physical element of love, which is about sex on that part. For example, in Vaidhas Vilas, he writes, "Now that Sita is gone, who will I conduct the business of love with?" Ajit, this is an element of physical sex, an element of love. Whose gold-like form will rub against my touchstone of a body? Very physical in character. In the subsequent periods, in 1936, when Orissa got its own state based on the language, and they wanted to create textbooks where poetry can be taught to the students, there was a sudden rejection of such kind of poems because people thought poems of classical era cannot be brought down to the classrooms and taught to the students. Instead of a linear progression of Odia poetry, there was a disruptive progression of Odia poetry and a new generation of poets, those who came into the picture. There are many instances which have been debated in 1897 onwards. The Odisha was formed in 1936. But some post-independence love poems were heavily influenced by Western literature. Most of the post-independence Odia literature were heavily influenced by Western literatures. It appears as if poets were desperate to be free from the grammar of poetic rhythm and meter. While love took a root to metaphorical and philosophical dimensions with some elements of mysticism in it, Amritakshara Chanda, where the meter was being opened there, became an epitome of existing poetic brilliance. One of the distinct parts of Orissa poetry, evolution of Orissa poetry, is the long poems. Before that period of time, either you had a kavya or you had satar poems. But there were a couple of writers who came and they wrote long poems. For example, Sri Radha is a long poem. Sri Palataka is a long poem. The whole book is only one poem. Savari is by Pratibha Satpathy is also a long poem. So there was a trend of writing down a long poem. I think Westland, Hollowman, and Four Quarters by T.S. Eliot were some of the successful publications that influenced a lot of new generation Odia poets. They tried to Indianize or Oriadize the process which are there. Of course, the first long poem was written by Sachi Rautrai in 1938, but the epitome came when Sridhar came, or Ahalya came, or all other poets came. But the true long poem is Kalapurus by Guru Prasad Mahanti, which was published in 1955, and justifies the element of love and belongingness which are there. There's a new trend which is emerging in Odia literature. The trend is about modern poems, but mostly ancient myth. We are taking ancient myths and writing modern poems. For example, Jajati, the famous character, a long poem by Sarat Chandra Pradhan, Pratibha Satpathy's Savari, which was referred about. One of my favorite poets, Pani Mohanty's Ahalya, and Suresh Parida's Kanhu. These are the poems that express loneliness, suffering, longing, and seeking the ultimate, which are dimensionalities of love poems which are there. So these are the poems which have crossed what we call as Thana, place, Kala, time, and Patra, character. Sri Radha, published in 1985, Sri Palatak in 1997, and Simanta Basa in 2002 are exceptions, as they have gone beyond mundane love into cosmic love through their philosophical underpinnings. So you can see a cycle running from physical love to mundane love to philosophical love and bringing you back. Now, like all other literature and all other languages which are presented here, is that Odia literature also looks up to the future? Are there any modern poets who are also on the same tradition or breaking the traditions? I don't consider as a young poet anymore. Love poems written in the last 20 years in Odia literature have tried to further simplify the approach and manifestation of love. Instead of bringing only the context of love, they are intermingled with the social reforms, metaphysical consciousness, social equity, and a strong message against the difficulties of Odia society. In the poems of Truck Dalare Sanatan, Sanatan is a character who is in the back end of a truck, by Prasanna Mishra, Fani Mahanty's Mrigaya, and Sukha Sanhita by Deepak Misra, we can experience how love poems have moved from individualistic, intense personal experience to socially responsible yet romantic poems. That's the enrichment of Odia literature and Odia poems. The new generation writers like Suresh Natha Tripathi, Shopna Mishra, Kedar Mishra are using love as a route for finding self-identity and experiencing elevated dignity of Odia writers. While metaphors, textures, and text have remained intense in love, the tonality has moved towards self-compassion, love for others, and bringing about a world that has more equity and happiness. I think the primary driver love is to bring that equity and happiness within individuals, keeping that belongingness intact. I realize that Odia's love poems no longer mean only romantic poems.